Okay, now we're ready to learn the increases. I have knit through row 9 on the chart. Row 10 is where we start with our increase stitches. So I'm going to start by knitting row 10 up to the point where the green stitch marker, or right now there's no stitch on the chart. So I'm going to knit up to that point on the row, and then I'll explain how we go about doing these increase stitches. They're a little bit tricky, but once you understand how they work, they're not too bad. Okay. So now I've gone up to where the green stitch marker would be, and I actually, on my Kiss loom, I have the green stitch markers there. You can see them. They're on the pin behind the peg. So I'm going to start by moving all of these stitches that I just knit on this row out 2 pegs. So I'm going to move them out beyond the edge of the row, and I'm going to move the stitch markers with them. So there's my stitch marker for the edge stitch, and then I've got the pink one, okay, there's all my stitches moved. Now I have 2 empty pegs. I'm going to reach under and grab those stitch markers and put them on the empty pegs. So you can see on the chart for this row, whoops, okay, I'm actually on row 10. So you see where the green stitch markers are, you have the increased stitches, and then there are still 2. We'll expand it 2 more in another couple of rows, but here's where I had no stitch here and no stitch here, so I've had to expand the row to put those stitches in. Now we have to find the stitch to pull up and make a new stitch in the row. And on this side where I've already knit that stitch, I'm actually going to go not the stitch that's on the peg and not the one immediately behind, but the next one, because I've actually got to go to the row. So this is row 10, this is row 9. I actually want to reach back to row 8 to get that stitch. And that's what will make our new stitch in the row. And then when I get to the next one, I haven't knit this stitch in the new row yet. So the stitch that's on the peg is from row 9. I'm going to go back to row 8 and pull that stitch up and put it on the peg. I got to make sure I get just the loop I want. There we go. So now I have loops on those 2 pegs that were empty, and the increased stitches get knit rather than purled. So I'm going to knit those 2 stitches, and then I will go on and continue in the row until we get to the next increase stitch, which is on the other side of the pattern. So I'm going to stop and come back in a minute. Okay, I've knit around the row until again I hit the spot where my green stitch markers are behind there, and this time I haven't knit the stitches yet, so to the rest of the stitches in the row that I haven't done all have to be moved again out 2 pegs. So I move my stitch marker and the stitch, and this is where You know, if your knitting is too tight, this is a struggle. So it's good to keep, you know, to make sure that your stitches aren't too tight as you're doing this kind of a pattern. So you have enough leeway to move your pegs around, or to move the stitches around on the pegs. That will also be important as we do the cables later. So get used to knitting with a little bit less tension than I think we often use in loom knitting. Okay, so there are my 2 stitch markers. I'm going to pull them out. There's one. And put them on those empty pegs. Since I don't have any spacers in here, the pegs and the pins are a little close together, so I have to push my markers down. There we go. Now, again, I'm going to pull from the previous row. Okay, this is the stitch that I just knit, so I'm not going to pull the next one back. I'm going to go back behind the working yarn and pull the one behind that. I can't get a hold of it. I seem to have an extra bit of yarn there. This is the tricky part, is making sure you get the right loop of yarn. Okay, there we go. That's the one I want. And then in this stitch where I haven't knit it on the row, I'm just going to go to the one immediately behind it. So this is row 9 stitch. I'm going to take the row 8 stitch again. There it is. And again, I will knit those 2 stitches and finish the rest of the row. And I will actually knit over up to, let's see, I'm finishing row 10, and I will continue on and knit row 11 as well, and start again on row 12 where the next set of increases happen. These will be a little bit different because the increases that we just did, we were pulling stitches from a purl stitch, and now we're going to have to pull from a knit stitch. So it just looks a little bit different when you're finding the loop from the row behind to make the new stitch with. It looks a little different when you're working with a knit stitch. So let me finish that up. You can knit through row 11 and we'll start on row 12. Okay, now I'm ready to knit row 12. You can see when I get over to where the green stitch markers are, I'm going to knit the green stitch marker, and then I'm going to make 2 more stitches in between those 2 green markers right now, and then that will be as wide as the row gets. So we start by knitting the beginning of the row. I've got a couple of purls, and then we have those 2 knit stitches. And we purl over to the stitch before the green marker. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit the stitch on the first green marker, and then I have to make my 2 extra stitches in between here. So again, just like we did before, I'm going to move all of these stitches out 2, along with their stitch markers, including the first green stitch marker, because I'm making, on the chart, there are 2 stitches between the green markers when you get to the widest part of the row. So here I move my marker out. All right, and I have my 2 empty stitches again. And same principle as before. I'm on row 12 now. I'm going to actually reach back and take the stitches from row 10, 2 rows back. So this is the row 12 stitch. This is the row 11 stitch, which was knit. And then I have to reach back behind that, and it's behind my working yarn here, and get the stitch from row 10. And then here, this is the row 11 stitch on this peg. So I'm just going to get the very next one back. And that one's easy to find now because it's a knit stitch, so it's the last stitch is on top. And it's very easy to put onto the next peg. And then I will knit those 2, because those are the new stitches. And then I also knit the next green stitch marker before I move on to the next part of the row where I have increases. So as long as you remember that if you're doing making an extra stitch from a stitch that you've already knit in the row you're in, you have to go back an extra row to pull the loop. If it's a stitch that you haven't knit yet in that row, then you just pull the stitch behind the one that's on the peg. And if you have good tension in your stitches, this is where if you have too much tension would make it hard for me to move all these stitches around when I need to. Not enough tension, and I would get a hole where I do the increased stitch. So you really have to, getting in the habit of keeping good tension on your stitches as you knit is really important as you get to these patterns that are a little more complicated. And that's part of why I really like to use the Kiss looms, because I find it so much easier to keep good tension on the stitches than on a regular loom. I know people often are finding ways to be able to knit with less tension in their stitches, and you really, there's kind of no choice when you're using a loom like this with the metal pegs. You just can't knit too tight. All right, so now I have gotten up to the next green stitch marker. I've knit that stitch, and I'm going to move all the rest of the stitches in the row out 2 pegs. Whoops, along with their stitch markers. And apparently I got a little bit tight on my last row because these stitches are wanting to stretch a bit. It was there, yes, I did put it on the right peg. So see how I'm kind of having to pull a little bit to get the stitches moved? And you have to, that's the downside of using the Kiss looms, is that you have to be so careful when you're moving stitches that you get them on the right side of the pins and the pegs. So I have to make sure that each stitch comes in between the 2 pins to the peg. But that's something you get used to fairly quickly. All right, and my other green stitch marker is the last stitch that's going to move. So now I need to pull, again, I'm on row 12. I actually need to pull from row 10. So this is row 11 stitch. This is row 10 stitch. And that comes up. And then over here, I haven't knit the row 12 yet. This is row 11. This is row 10. Oops. So I filled my empty pegs. I knit those two. And I also knit the green stitch marker. So now we've got our 4 knit stitches in a row that are the beginning of the string of our knot, our Celtic knot in the pattern. And then we have some pearls for the background, and then we have another, oops, one more pearl. We have another sort of strand of the knot that goes up the side, which is where those 2 knit stitches by the pink stitch marker happen. So that is how we do our increases, and fortunately in this pattern we only have to do them once. At the end we'll do some decreasing and get our row back down to its initial size, and then actually we'll make it smaller for the palm of the glove. So I hope you understand the increase stitches. Feel free to email me or comment on the video if you have questions. And the next difficult part of the pattern is the cables. So you can watch my videos on doing cables in Celtic knots.